Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. In this episode, we're talking about a bill that has more drama than a reality TV reunion special, the Ukraine aid package. The U.S. Congress has finally decided to act because nothing says we're here for you quite like waiting until the last possible moment to send help. It's like watching a friend take 20 minutes to get off the couch to get you a glass of water when you're coughing up a lung. Thanks, Congress. We really appreciate the urgency. Well, first, let's take a look at our latest report on this issue to find out more.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed optimism regarding Ukraine's prospects against invading Russian forces following the long-awaited passage of a crucial aid bill by the U.S. House of Representatives. Addressing the pressing need for advanced military equipment, Zelensky emphasized the necessity of swift delivery to the front lines, where ammunition shortages have led to rationing by Ukrainian military commanders.
This time between political decisions and real enemy losses at the front, between the approval of the package and the strength of our guys, should be as short as possible. And it should be the kind of force that can really change the situation on the front line.
The bill, which includes $61 billion in Ukrainian aid as a part of a broader $95 billion package, has garnered praise from Ukraine and its European allies. President Joe Biden urged the Senate to promptly approve the bill, emphasizing the urgency of meeting Ukraine's battlefield needs.
Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that needs to defend itself.
However, the Kremlin responded negatively to the House vote, suggesting that U.S. support would only prolong the conflict and cause further loss of life in Ukraine. Russian Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations Dmitry Polyansky reiterated Moscow's stance, asserting the inevitability of what he termed the inglorious end of the Ukrainian government.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. This bill is a big deal. We're talking about a $95.3 billion package that aims to support Ukraine's military, Israel's security, and even help Taiwan. It's the kind of package that makes you wonder if it comes with a complimentary tote bag and a membership to the We Finally Get It Done Club. So what does this bill actually do? Well, it provides military aid to Ukraine, which is great. It replenishes U.S. weapon systems, which is also great. And it also intends to give humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, which is, you guessed it, great. It's like a legislative Swiss Army knife covering all bases. Even though some House conservatives did need a little extra convincing, but that's besides the point. Now let's talk specifics. Among the weapons that could go out the door faster than the teenagers sneaking out after a curfew are the critical 155mm rounds and other artillery, along with some air defense munitions. These are the kind of things that Ukraine really needs, like yesterday. But here's where it gets interesting. The bill also allows the US president to immediately transfer long-range attack missiles to Ukraine. Sounds simple, right? Well, it does come with a caveat. The president can refuse to transfer these missiles if it would harm U.S. national interests. Now, you might be wondering, how soon will all this get to Ukraine? According to unnamed officials cited by the Washington Post, the answer is very soon. We're talking about U.S. military aid worth around $61 billion that could start arriving within a week after President Biden signs the bill into law, much like Amazon Prime, but for military equipment. And you know the Pentagon is excited about this. They've been preparing weapons, ammunition, and equipment to make sure it all gets delivered ASAP. Because, let's be honest, when it comes to supporting Ukraine, delayed shipping is not an option. And speaking of urgency, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham recently said that Vladimir Putin will not stop, even if he's successful in Russia's war with Kyiv. This isn't just a battle. It's a marathon with the finish line nowhere to be seen. So, there you have it. A bill that took forever to pass with a bunch of strings attached and a touch of urgency that could have been sprinkled in a bit earlier. But hey, the most important issue is for this help to reach Ukraine as soon as possible. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Chris Morris, a lecturer at the University of Portsmouth. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
So we are looking at this newly passed aid budget for Ukraine, and I'm wondering, for the first thing first, what is the most urgent thing that Ukraine will be needing right now, and do you think that this package will be able to fulfill that?
Well, it's great news that this aid package has been passed, and it's great news in that it means billions of pounds are going to be making their way into Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a game changer of the magnitude we might want. Now, hopefully, with this being passed, it's going to mean that there's going to be some immediate relief coming to Ukraine, hopefully in the form of new artillery shells and replenishment of their air defense systems. Now, this can hopefully start having an impact by the end of April, presuming that these supplies are available and there is a robust supply chain for getting them into Ukraine. Now, it's not going to completely alter the texture of the conflict, unfortunately. It's hopefully going to give Ukraine what they need to hold the line into the short and mid-term.
Right, so hopefully this will give Ukraine some breathing room. And at the same time, I do want to look at the Russian response. A lot of the netizens posts on the internet right now are showcasing the fact that perhaps Vladimir Putin and those in the Kremlin did not see this coming. They're probably hoping for this not to get past the House of Representatives. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're looking at the kind of tenor in both Europe and America, there is building misgivings about the scale of this conflict and the commitments that are being made. So it's been persistent in the US. We've had House Republicans talking about like the fiscal strain that this is placing on the US. So surprisingly, this has come as a bit of a shock to Russian kind of mill bloggers and of course the Russian regime itself.
Right, and how do you think they will respond to this now that it has become a reality? They will know, of course, sooner rather than later, Ukraine will have more capacity than they previously predicted. Do you foresee any changes in the battlegrounds?
Yes, absolutely. So this is going to push back the Russian timeline for advancing. Now, they have been making some successful advances. I say successful, the cost imposed on Russian forces by Ukraine has been absolutely ruinous. Still, they have been able to push forward. They've been leveraging some of their advantages in terms of their numerical, the sheer number of soldiers that they have, the equipment they have in terms of artillery and glide bombs. Now, what Ukraine is going to be able to do now is continue to impose a prohibitive cost on Russia, probably right through 2024. So as a result, it's really going to push the Russian timeline substantially backwards.
All right, and then I want to go to a little more complicated issue when it comes to Ukraine's other allies, as a lot of people are saying that the hold or this postpone in U.S. aid actually did wake up some European countries and make it so that they are more aware of how much they should kind of pull its weight. And now with the passing of this new funding, do you think that the European countries will fall back to the default reliance on the United States, or do you think they will continue to up their support for Ukraine and with the aid of this kind of new package from the U.S.?
Yeah, hopefully this is going to be the impetus that Europe needs to really unite behind Ukraine. Now, several European partners have spent the last few months effectively warning of complacency. So hopefully this is going to be a real moment. And all too often it does seem to be the case that Europe follows America. And hopefully this is going to give European leaders a bit of a wake-up call that they need to be supporting Ukraine as well.
Right, definitely. And hopefully, like you said, this will breathe new life into Ukraine's defense. But however, you also mentioned earlier that this might not be the game changer that everyone's hoping that it would be. So my question would be, what kind of support do you think they would need at the moment, or at least in the near future, that would allow them to perhaps make a game-changing move?
Okay, so I would push back the timeline for any kind of Ukrainian push forward well into 2025 as a possibility. Now, even with the equipment that Ukraine needs, and there is evidence that is flowing in now, unfortunately, this is not a war that anybody is really equipped to fight quickly and effectively. We're talking about a grinding war of attrition. We're talking about trench warfare. It's prohibitively costly for either side to move forward, particularly without things like control of the air. So I would not anticipate there being a push anytime soon from the Ukrainian side. Like I say, the kind of moment is about holding the line. Now, again, it's going to be very challenging for Ukraine to commit to any kind of offensive operations in the near future. Even should the weapons crisis be resolved, and even with this enhanced aid package, we can only say that that's been accomplished partially. They're still facing kind of massive issues with mobilization and getting troops into the field to actually address the major advantage that Russia has in terms of manpower. So again, I would say there's not going to be any game-changing moves from Ukraine in the near future.
Right. And when it comes to manpower, we do know some reports are saying that the Russians outnumber the Ukrainians on the east of the front line somewhere close to 10-1, which is a significant number. Do you think there's any possibility of any tech that could somehow overcome this, or if not overcome, at least kind of merge this gap?
Unfortunately, this is something that we've seen time and time again. Whilst Western weapon systems are immensely useful, there is no wonder weapon waiting in the Western arsenal to solve this type of problem. This is not a war that America would be comfortable fighting. This is not a war that anybody in Europe would be comfortable fighting. The level of combat engineering, the level of artillery that is being shown on the front line, again, this is a very difficult and kind of anticipated war to fight. So in terms of there being a perfect solution, whilst there's many things that the West can put on the table to help alleviate things, like, artillery, air defense, hopefully those F-16s are going to be inbound by the end of the year. None of it is going to fundamentally alter the texture of this conflict. It's still going to be hard, it's still going to be prolonged, and there is no quick, surefire solution to bring a rapid end to this conflict, unfortunately.
Right. Inside this aid package, there's also mentioning of long-range ATACMS being added to probably some of the things that would be supplied to Ukraine. Do you think at least that could help shape the front line in ways that is more beneficial to Ukraine?
Absolutely. So hopefully with it being long range, what Ukraine is going to be able to continue to do is reach behind the Russian kind of front lines, hit their logistics, hit their supply. And this is going to really make it more difficult for them to effectively maneuver, to concentrate force. And it's really going to alter, I suppose, the considerations that Russia has to think about when it goes on the offensive. So it will be a really, really positive move. But in terms of fundamentally altering the balance of power on the front line, I think that's unfortunately unlikely at this juncture.
Right. One of the strategies that Ukrainians have been employing with arguably some effectiveness is hitting inside Russian territory when it comes to the oil refineries. It has reduced Russia's output when it comes to energy. But there's also suggestions to put a halt to that from some of the American allies. Can you help us break down where this analysis is coming from?
Okay, so naturally, whilst Western support is absolutely crucial in the ongoing conflict, they are going to be increasingly mindful that they do not want this war expanding. And critically, you've also got to consider that if you think about Russian doctrine, any strikes within their territory could ultimately result in an escalation and perhaps even a significant, nuclear weapons could even be brought forward onto the table. So as a result, Western backers are unsurprisingly reluctant to, I suppose, advocate for these attacks within Russian territory.
Right. So speaking of this Western alliance's reluctance, I'm also wondering about the possibility of a fatigue as we see this bill or this funding package did get somewhat of a pushback when it compared to the other things that it was supposed to be bundled with. When it comes to the voting count, the numbers, they're not as overwhelming as, say, the support to Israel or the ones to Indo-Pacific. Do you think that's going to be a problem going forward?
Yes, absolutely. So whilst Ukraine is a significant challenge on the global stage, there are many things happening as well. And this is a particular going to draw a focus in America. So not only are they contending with a domestic kind of looming fiscal crisis, they're also our global security guarantor. They've also got to help stabilize the Middle East. They're also thinking about the South Pacific and Taiwan. So America has a lot on its plate at the moment. And it's unsurprising that many of these other conflicts are ultimately drawing some of the focus away from Ukraine.
Right. Do you think there's any messaging that could be done by both the Democratic Party, the Republican Party in the States to convince or to relay that information to the populace about why it's so important to keep supporting Ukraine throughout this war? Or do you think the partisanship of this topic and the upcoming election will ultimately drive a rift between the two sides?
Absolutely. Well, foremost, I will say that I do anticipate Ukraine being a significant obstacle in the upcoming election. It's probably going to fall into partisan politics, and that's not good for Ukraine, that's not good for America. What I would be stressing at this moment in time is that failure to support Ukraine in the short term is going to have massive long-term implications. Ultimately, failure in Ukraine does not mean peace in Europe. It means that the front line moves forward, probably to the borders of Poland. So as a result, if America fails to effectively commit to adequate support now, then it's probably going to be looking at a far more serious engagement in the future. It's also worth stressing that what Ukraine has been able to achieve here is massive. In terms of America going to war with Russia itself directly, you could say that Ukraine is doing it effectively for pennies on the dollar when it comes to the US fiscal commitment. So that's a significant factor as well.
And do you think the acknowledgement of this factor is the reason to why half of the Republicans and the Speaker, Mike Johnson himself, also kind of ultimately put their support behind the funding?
Yes, absolutely. So there is this awareness that failure to address this situation adequately is going to lead to a downward spiral in security, not just in Ukraine, but globally. If Russia is emboldened by its move in Ukraine, then this is effectively going to give the green light to all kinds of other regimes that they can go out, do things, and America is not going to seriously commit to addressing them.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the latest stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has extended his gratitude to Iran's armed forces, commending their recent actions in response to escalating tensions with Israel. The remarks come in the wake of Tehran's military operation, which saw over 300 missiles and drones launched at Israel, purportedly in retaliation for an Israeli strike on Iran's embassy compound in Damascus.
While details regarding the efficiency of the strike remain secondary, the Iranian Supreme Leader emphasized the display of Iran's resolve during the operation and underscored the nation's unwavering determination. However, amidst escalating tensions, Khamenei urged Iran's military to continuously pursue innovation and to be vigilant in understanding the tactics of their adversaries. The recent exchange of hostilities began with a suspected Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy compound in Syria, leading to Tehran's retaliatory strike on Israel. Although Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's war cabinet reportedly considered a direct strike inside Iranian territory, concerns over escalation and warnings from allies, including the United States, reportedly led to the decision to launch limited strikes. Despite the tensions, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported no damage to Iran's nuclear site, allaying concerns of a potential collateral damage from the recent hostilities.
Slovaks are defying their government's refusal to send military aid to Ukraine by raising nearly 2 million euros to buy ammunition for Kyiv's forces. This grassroots effort comes as Ukraine is in desperate need of supplies after 2 years of war with Russia.
The Ammunition for Ukraine drive has raised nearly 1.94 million euros in just 4 days, with over 30,000 contributors. Fundraising will continue indefinitely, with proceedings going towards the Czech ammunition purchase. The first deliveries to Ukraine are expected in June. Organizers say the crowdfunding campaign aims to show that a majority of Slovaks disagree with the government's recent shift in foreign policy. The new Slovakian government of Robert Fico declined to join the Czech-led initiative to purchase hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, which has garnered support from at least 15 other countries. The Slovakian government halted military aid last year, arguing for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Prime Minister Robert Fico has even echoed Russia's calls for peace talks, despite Ukraine's insistence on fighting until Russian troops withdrew entirely. Previous administrations provided air defense systems and fighter jets to Ukraine. In contrast, Fico's foreign minister met with the Russian counterpart in March, a rare high-level encounter between the EU member and Russia.
Residents in Armenia's Tavush province are up in arms over a new border agreement with Azerbaijan. The deal, held by the US and EU, returns control of 4 villages to Azerbaijan and sparks concern from locals about safety and access to land.
Following the announcement, residents of the border villages in question blocked roads linking their villages to major towns. Villagers fear the new border, based on Soviet-era maps, will cut them off from farmlands and disrupt vital transportation links. Increased vulnerability to Azerbaijani attacks under the new arrangement is another major concern. The agreement, reached after the talks between Armenian and Azerbaijani officials, focuses on a specific section of the border near Tavush region. Armenia will cede control of 4 villages previously under their control since 1990s, as a first step towards full border demarcation. The Armenian government has attempted to assuage these fears, stressing that the deal creates a demarcation state border, separating the villages from Azerbaijani forces. They also emphasized continued Armenian border patrols and promised further security details soon.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has enacted a National Security and Defense Council decision aimed at curbing the negative impacts of online gambling. This follows a petition launched by one soldier highlighting the alarming scale of the issue caused by soldiers seeking an outlet for stress.
Ukraine is tightening restrictions on online gambling, particularly for its military personnel due to concerns about addiction among soldiers. The new measures will target several areas, including limited gambling ads featuring Ukrainian military symbols. The Security Service of Ukraine will inspect gambling operators, and the National Bank will develop procedures for banks to block credit card payments for gambling sites. The government will negotiate with Apple and Google to prevent unlicensed gambling apps from their stores. Military psychologists acknowledge the problem exists, though not on an overwhelming scale. This crackdown comes after Ukraine legalized gambling in 2020. While a register for individuals banned from gambling exists, experts point out the pre-legalization era saw the industry operating in the shadows. The head of Ukraine's Gambling Regulatory Commission emphasizes protecting citizens and preventing addiction as a key priority.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news update and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.